The story of the Oldsmobile LSS starts way back in 1986 with the introduction of GM's H-body platform. The BOP sister cars from Buick, Oldsmobile, and Pontiac were to be the next big thing from GM, and development cost around $3 billion, similar to how much Ford spent on the Taurus.
Jump ahead though to the mid-1990s. GM updated their popular H-body Buick LeSabre, Pontiac Bonneville, and Oldsmobile 88. But this one's special. What we have here is a 1996 Oldsmobile LSS, or Luxury Sports Sedan. GM hoped that this car would attract younger buyers away from cars like the BMW 5 Series. At the heart of this Olds LSS is GM's 3.8-liter L67 V6 engine, or better known as the Series 2 Supercharged V6. At the time it produced 240 horsepower, 280 pound-feet of torque. At the time it was considered one of the best engines of the year and one of the best engines of all time. This engine is known for its reliability and overall low cost of maintenance, even 25 years later. This 10th generation Oldsmobile 88 was first produced from 1992 until 1999. The first facelift was in 1994, which updated the front grille, the headlamps, and the dashboard, and also allowed for a passenger side airbag, which was a first for a GM vehicle on this platform. 1995 saw the first supercharged engine available on this car, but only produced 225 horsepower and was very limited. This year, GM's OEM navigation system called GuideStar was optional for the first time. That brings us to this 1996, another facelift year with another new grille, rounded off headlights, and the body trim was updated to give it a more aerodynamic appearance. The rear end was also updated slightly, but this LSS received the Oldsmobile Aurora's leather bucket seats, but the center console stayed the same for this year, whereas the facelifts were different. So what made the luxury sports sedan different from a regular Oldsmobile 88? Well, first off, it had the optional supercharged engine, which ours has, steering mounted audio and HVAC controls, a floor shifter and center console, meaning it's a 5-passenger vehicle instead of 6. It also had full dashboard instrumentation, 16-inch alloy rims, higher spring rates, and larger diameter stabilizer bars for the suspension. This improved the handling and gave the LSS a firmer ride, along with a self-leveling rear suspension. Now, GM wanted to make this car much simpler to buy than something like a BMW 5 Series where pretty much everything was an option. They gave you a lot of the core features on this trim and added some of the optional extras on top. Some of the standard features we have on this included ABS brakes with front discs and rear drums, electronic traction control, remote keyless entry, a security system, daytime running lights, fog lamps, power locks, windows, and mirrors. The interior on this is huge and comfortable, with dual zone automatic climate control, the controls for the passenger side on the door card, something that we really don't see. Twilight Sentinel, which is the automatic headlights that we featured back when we did the Cadillac DeVille. The electrochromic mirror with compass, center storage with cup holder, dual sun visors for the driver and passenger, a power trunk release, a Delco AM/FM cassette with 6 speakers, bucket front seats with 8-way power. There were some optional extras as well, depending on what you wanted out of your LSS, including the supercharged engine. As I mentioned, we have 16-inch chrome rims, a CD player, block heater for the engine, power sunroof, and you could have had optional cloth interior instead of these supple leather seats. One thing that's really interesting to note is how utterly useless these windows are. The front ones, you've got piece of glass that doesn't even open up, something you never see today. And then the back ones, I guess because of child safety laws, they only go down about 3 inches. But aside from that though, the interior on this still feels modern despite the fact that this car is 25 years old. Now, I would not be here today showing you this 1996 Olds LSS if it wasn't for one of my viewers who reached out to me and asked if I wanted to feature their car. So a big thanks to Andrew for not only allowing us to see this car, it's pristine, great condition for a 25-year-old vehicle, but he's put his trust in me to actually take the car home and feature it over the course of several days so I can get a really good idea of how this car is on the road and how to live with it. And you can also be the next owner of it if you're interested in it. As of filming this, it is for sale. We'll have the links in the description for the various sites that it's listed on. So if you are in the market for one of these final generation LSSs, then you can definitely see what it has to offer by checking the links out there and hopefully be the next owner and custodian of such a well-maintained vehicle. But that's about it for the exterior. We want to take this on the road. I want to talk about how it is to drive this vehicle, what the performance is like in today's field, in today's world with a supercharged V6, and everything else you need to know about the front-wheel drive chassis, the 4-speed automatic transmission, and anything else about a full-size Oldsmobile 88 LSS. I gotta say, today is a hot one. Super glad that I've got a nice pair of shades on, and air conditioning on this is ice cold air conditioning. Now let's talk a little bit about this before we really jump into the nitty gritty. I want to talk about a couple of things on the outside and inside, just because really the introduction walk around was more about the history of the vehicle and some of the mechanical info. I didn't really talk about my opinion about it. And the thing is, I've really never paid attention to Oldsmobile. I drove one before I drove this. It was a Delta 88, the like 2 or 3 generations before this one. I think 2 generations, so 8th gen. This is a 10th, and that was about it. So the styling of this is pretty consistent with what GM was doing at the time. Certainly doesn't look modern by today's standards, but I do think it works for this era of vehicle. But I do like the look of this version here because it's got sort of the original rocket logo that at least I associate with Oldsmobile. The new one, the last one that they used for whatever, like 5-6 years of their existence, I don't know. I mean, like, they were obviously trying to rebrand the vehicle, rebrand Oldsmobile as something more than just a company for old people, but I like the look of this. So there's some exterior stuff that are pretty cool on this. There's not really any outstanding tech on the outside. The automatic headlights are pretty cool though. We talked about that when we did the Cadillac DeVille. Couldn't test it though. I can tell you that they do work. I have had a chance to test this by taking it in a tunnel, and they came on automatically as well as at night, so you can adjust how sensitive they are, and you can also just override it, either have them off or have them on. So some basic stuff there, it all works. So the exterior on this, kind of Oldsmobile-y. You can argue that it's very grandpa oriented, and I can definitely see that. It certainly makes me feel like I am driving a grandpa car, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, this thing is so smooth and comfortable. I don't care what people think. And when I drove this home, I had so many people checking this car out because, first of all, now I can't tell you the last time I saw one of these on the road. And then if you knew what this was, you know it's something special. Because the thing is, on the outside of the vehicle, it doesn't say anything about it being supercharged. It just says the LSS. So again, if you were sort of an Oldsmobile aficionado at the time, you'd know, okay, it's the top end version of the 88. But you'd have to look underneath the hood to see that this is like the really special version. So it truly is a sleeper car, which is awesome. But I had a lot of people checking it out. Probably a lot of people who were looking at it probably owned one of these before. These were very popular vehicles back in the day. They sold pretty well, not incredibly well, but pretty well. And you know, there are still some examples out there, but if you're looking at classic, 90s era Oldsmobiles, you're going to be finding a lot of Cutlass,
not so much the 88s, and definitely not too much of the 98s. So we can go into a whole history on this vehicle. I don't have the time for it today, but it would be pretty cool to explore a little bit more of Oldsmobile if we get some more vehicles like this, because I do want to focus on what makes this specific car and this model so cool, because I've really enjoyed it. So that's the exterior. Let's talk about the inside here a little bit. First of all, pretty straightforward, basic sort of setup, what you would get in the 90s. But I've driven a number of cars from the 90s, and this feels really good in terms of build quality. I mean, everything is super well built. Everything's still put together well after 25 years. Crazy quiet in here. I'd say that this is quieter than a lot of the new cars that we feature that are obviously a lot less than what this would have retailed for original, especially with inflation. But it's so quiet in here, it's so comfortable. The ride is super smooth, even though this has sort of the upgraded suspension system on this. I just find that you go over the bumps, you feel absolutely nothing. You'll see it here in a second as we go over the train tracks in our little town here. You're not even going to notice that I went over them. Look at that. You never know. It's so smooth. So there's so much to like about this. I'm thoroughly impressed. And I keep having to remind myself that this is a 25-year-old car, but because it's been so well maintained, because the overall mechanics have been looked after on this, it really does feel a lot newer than it really should, because brakes, super nice. Suspension and steering, good as well. It doesn't feel like a boat. It doesn't feel sporty either, but at the time, a lot of the reviewers said that this thing did perform very similarly to a lot of BMWs and a lot of the German luxury vehicles out there. So Oldsmobile did a fantastic job. GM did a great job putting this thing together, and the fact that we're still driving it here 25 years later shows just how good of a job they ultimately did. But I have to say that it doesn't give me that typical land yacht experience, which I kind of like. I do like that it's a little bit more refined than what you typically get. But I think it's interesting, we've got automatic climate control, and not just automatic climate control, dual zone automatic climate control on this. The controls on the passenger door are very interesting, but they work. The controls on the steering wheel are very interesting as well. The only thing about the interior on this, the current owner will be putting the old radio back in, which will allow us to actually use the steering mounted controls for it. But the fact that you've got the HVAC controls on here too is so weird. It just feels kind of strange. But again, it works. I can easily turn up the heat or air conditioning, and a day like today we want that air on full. So I've had to turn down the fan speed itself just so that you guys can actually see what I'm doing and hear what I'm doing, but it is really good. But anyway, interior space on this, fantastic. I am very comfortable here. It's only a tilt steering wheel, it doesn't telescope. That'd be my only complaint about it, but it's a 25-year-old car, what do you expect? Rear seat space, huge. You can fit a lot of big guys in the back there with no problem, so you don't get that kind of experience anymore. Seat comfort, next level. I am so comfortable sitting here. It really does feel like a big sofa. I love it. And visibility too. I mean, it is kind of like an aquarium here, but that's good. You can see a lot around you. You want to see a lot around you because you want to be looking at the other people who are checking you out as you're driving by, because they are doing it. I'm telling you right now, you're going to get a lot of looks in this thing. So I've been very impressed. I got to say, again, this being the second Oldsmobile I've ever driven in my life. This one quite a bit newer than the first one I ever drove, but I am not disappointed. As soon as I got the message from Andrew asking me if I wanted to feature this car, I knew I had to, and I am so happy that I did. It just shows me what GM was doing, and it shows back in the 90s, GM was really on top. I mean, all of this tech, all of these features that were pretty new back in the 90s. I know a lot of people complain that I said that about Twilight Sentinel. It wasn't really that new when we featured it on the Cadillac DeVille. It's been out forever for GM, but I mean, they were really looking at ways to improve how a car could perform, drive, handle, and everything about it. And it really showed that they were on top of their game back in the 90s. So there's some cool stuff about it. It feels a whole lot more modern than a 25-year-old car should. I'm telling you right now, I've driven so many of them. This one feels a lot newer. It certainly feels a lot newer than my Ford Focus, and that's a 2006. So it's 10 years newer, and this thing feels a whole lot better than it. So there's serious stuff to like about this car. I've been thoroughly impressed. Really, really impressed with this. I just absolutely adore driving it. It's so fun. Not that it's overly quick, performance on it, especially by today's standards, is pretty slow, 240 horsepower, and you can get that out of like a subcompact vehicle now. But just the way that it all is put together pushes this super heavy vehicle in a functional way. The fuel economy, I don't know, it's probably good enough. We'll never know for sure, but yeah, it kind of gets the job done. But you can tell people that you've got a supercharged GM V6 and it performs the way that you would hope that would, because I've driven a lot of cars that honestly, it's pretty scary when you're trying to get onto the highway. You're thinking you ain't gonna make it. This thing, no problem. I don't think I've ever said that about a classic car being able to get up, unless you're going up to like, you know, something like the Lexus LS or old BMW 7 Series, Mercedes S-Class, those things boogie. But this is a Oldsmobile, and it boogies too. I don't know who GM was kidding with these windows. Look at this thing. Kind of small there. Back windows, super useless. Anyway, Andrew, I'm sorry, but for science, we have to test how it performs off the line. I'm not gonna gun it, guys, okay? It's not my car. This deserves to be treated with respect, but if you needed to get up to speed in a quick fashion, could you do it? Let's see. Oh, buddy, should not have done it that hard, but oh man, look at that thing go. I'm not gonna go too fast here. It's a closed course clearly, but man, oh man, off the line, this thing is ready to go. That's what you're buying it for, and that's why if you're in the market for one of these cars, you have got to find the supercharged version. Not any LSS will have it because it was an option. Take a look online because the information is a little hit or miss. I know some places say that they all have them, but I have the sales brochure from 1996. It was an option, but you do want this one. I'm telling you right now, you will be thoroughly impressed, just as I have been. But that's about it for our road test. Let's head back to the studio. I want to talk about some of the things you need to look out for if you're in the market for this generation Oldsmobile 88 and sort of GM cars in general from this era. We'll go over a quick buyer's guide so that you are better informed if you're in the market for one of these and want to know everything there is to know about this generation Oldsmobile 88 or LSS.
Now, there's a couple things to know about this Oldsmobile 88. If you're in the market for them, the first big elephant in the room comes to this Series 2 engine. Now, to be fair, from what I can tell, this seems to only apply to the non-supercharged version engines, but keep this in mind if you're shopping for an LSS or 88 in general. The engine itself came out in 1995, but in April of 2009, so 14 years later, they were recalled due to a fire risk. Oil could leak under the valve cover gaskets and drip onto the exhaust manifold. That's a problem already, but a fire could spread to the plastic spark plug wire retainers, so the fix to that was to replace those retainers, but still keep that in mind, the engine could leak a little bit onto the exhaust manifold. Also, the plastic upper intake manifolds can leak, which could cause the engine to hydrolock. The fix for that was to replace the lower intake gaskets and upper intake manifolds. They were revised on the engine. So take a look. You should have a service history for this. Let's be honest, most of the people that have these cars are probably still the first owners. They keep very good records on their vehicles. So make sure that the recalls for that have been done and see if it applies to whichever one you're looking at. It does affect these Series 2 motors. So again, coming from 95 plus, keep it in mind. Now, there are a couple other things to note when it comes to this. Because a lot of grandpas don't necessarily use the internet, it's not like there's a huge enthusiast base online when it comes to these Oldsmobiles, so finding actual information from owners is kind of hard. There's an Oldsmobile forum out there if you want to join that, but there really wasn't much on the 88 and definitely nothing on the LSS. Again, this being kind of a rare vehicle. One of the things I found is the key system, the anti-theft system. Like with most vehicles from the 80s and 90s, you get two keys, one rounded one for your doors and a squared off one to get into the ignition. But there's a anti-theft portion on it, a little raised part on the key itself. There is problems with the system itself. I don't know if it's the keys or just the way that the ignition system works, but they could have issues where the anti-theft system won't disengage properly, maybe because the key has worn out or the internal ignition system has worn out over time. There's also issues with the HVAC system, including the blower and vent actuators. So you might have air coming out, but it's not necessarily hot or cold depending on what you want, or the vents might not change. This one seems to work fine, so no issues on a somewhat lower mileage mileage vehicle like this, but keep it in mind. Also, the power steering can have issues, including steering rack failure. Now, I was told by the owner when this car was purchased by him, the steering rack was pretty much new, but the bolts that keep some parts of it together had completely failed. So it's strange that those bolts would fail, but the rest of the steering rack was fine. So keep it in mind that could be an issue with this. It's a pretty heavy car having to turn it, so you might want to look at the steering system. And finally, one of the other things that I've seen as somewhat common problem can be water pump failures. So take a look at the engine. As we always suggest, anytime you're buying a used car, to have it inspected by a trusted mechanic before making any purchase decisions. Get it inspected and looked over, make sure everything's done. And again, with a vehicle like this, you should have a pretty decent service history with it. But from what I can tell, everything else about this, not only on this car, works great, but there isn't much to worry about. The engines are pretty solid, especially with the Supercharger, which I know doesn't usually go together, but it does work. The engine reliability is the number one thing that I've heard about this vehicle. Interior has held up very well. Yes, the driver's seat is a little worn, passenger seat a little bit too, but you can get those reupholstered if you really wanted to, but it's not that bad. There's no rips or tears on it. The mechanics of the car work well. We didn't talk too much about the 4-speed automatic on our road test, but it shifted smoothly. I had no issues. Yeah, you floor it a little bit. It's got to find the gear, but it's a 4-speed. It's pretty simple. So this car will get you what you kind of want. If you're looking for a sleeper daily driver, something that actually does have some performance, looks okay, it's going to be up to you to decide if you like it or not, but the fact that this car is so rare in today's market, I mean, I cannot tell you the last time I've seen one of these, or really an Oldsmobile in general. I see a lot of Cutlass as the most popular one on the road, but even that, I don't know when I've seen those last. So if you're looking for something different, something unique, not necessarily your typical, Crown Victoria, Ford Mustang, Chevy Impala, those, cars that everybody kind of wants to hold on to, this could be a good option for you. And I've had a great time with it. Honestly, I've been telling you this the entire video. I have been so happy to be able to feature this car because it is something I didn't necessarily know existed. I didn't have this car on my list, but I am so glad that I had the chance to drive it. So if you have any questions about this car, I will do my best to get back to you in the comments, as I always do. Consider thumbs up on the video. It helps our analytics and our overall algorithm ranking when it comes to YouTube. And consider subscribing to our channel as well. We're hoping to do more classic car stuff like this now that things are getting back to normal here in Quebec. So if you do have a vehicle, something unique like this that you'd like to have featured, let me know. You can email me directly, niall@perpetualradio.ca. The link is in the description at the bottom, so you can do that. Reach out to me, and let's get some more classic cars featured here on Test Drive. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.